Well, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for coming. Want to honor your time, and besides, our camera guys got to get to some other appointments, so we'll go ahead and get ready to get started. Thank you all for being here. For some of us, it was a very long session. For others of us, it was a horrendously long session, I'm sure. The session is over. Speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, and I think, and I'll get our legislators to confirm this, but I think we were able to get some good stuff passed and get some bad stuff avoided. Never goes the way we all want it to be. But what I'm going to ask, because this is the Chamber of Commerce and we're business oriented, I'd like you to focus on kind of the business, education, workforce type stuff. I mean, there's a lot of other things happening up there. But if, did you guys flip a coin? You got any preference who goes first? We're going to Representative Stephanie Luck come first then. And she has brought her public relations person with her, so.
That's right. Say hi, Bob.
You want to hear Micaiah?
You want to hear from Micaiah? Okay, well, we'll see what he does here. Is it morning? No, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be in the district. The session is now officially over. It ended on Wednesday. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So 120 days, as always, 120 days. Some weekends, some not. Less weekends than last year. Over 700 bills introduced in that time. We have yet to see the final numbers, but I'd say roughly 500, 550, somewhere in that range passed. If we're focusing on the business things, I guess what I'll focus on, if it's okay with the senator, is some of the tax stuff that we saw, especially the last couple days of session. So just so you guys have a background, you may already know this, but so we're all on the same page. TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, passed the end of the last century, said that the people of Colorado understood that the role of government was important, that we needed to fund government, but that government is funded from the people, from the work of the people, from the labor of the people. And so we said, government, we are going to give you so much money and no more, right? We are going to work. We understand it to be our possession, and if you want it, then we're going to grant you the ability to have it without it being considered theft, but we're only going to give you a certain amount, and if you receive more from us in a given year, you have two options. You can either give it back to us automatically, or you can ask us for permission to keep it. Well, the way that they have been able to give it back to us is through varying forms. So through an income tax reduction, or through tax credits, or through sales tax reduction, or through those checks that people get in the mail, right? There's a 6-tiered mechanism that the legislature can choose from in terms of how to give back those dollars. Well, I am going to be playing with you and say that there are many in the legislature who do not like TABOR because it is a limitation on spending. It's a limitation on the amount of programs that can be accomplished. And so there is a desire to sort of hide TABOR's benefit from the folks. And so what they have done this year largely is institute a myriad of tax credits. In fact, over $1 billion of tax credits in order to limit the likelihood of the people getting those checks back in the mail directly as a TABOR refund, right? So that you can actually see the value of TABOR. These are tax credits that are given to incentivize particular behaviors or to prop up particular classes of people and citizenry. And so this year, we saw a myriad of tax credits. The largest tax credit that we saw was a tax credit for families. And this tax credit is a refundable tax credit, which means that you don't actually have to have put anything in to the pot in order to get something back out of the pot. It's also what we call a stackable tax credit, wherein you can stack it on other refundable tax credits. So the example was given on the House floor of a family that applied for 3 or 4 these tax credits, and even though their tax liability was only $350, they could, if they checked all the boxes of these tax credits, get $11,000 back. So that is the kind of stackable and refundable tax credits that we're talking about. A number of these tax credits are even available for people who are not here legally and who are not working legally. That is, again, a mechanism by which to eliminate those TABOR refund checks, but still disperse back to the population those excess funds. Because you see, the narrative is likely to be, TABOR doesn't do you any good, and so you should just get rid of TABOR. We saw that the last week of session with one bill. It's an income tax reduction bill. This bill says that we're going to reduce your income taxes commensurate with the amount of remaining TABOR dollars that haven't been allocated to these tax credits or haven't been otherwise dispersed. And so it'll sound great because the narrative will be income tax reduction, right? That we're reducing your income tax rates. But it only happens in the event that there are $300 million or more of TABOR surplus dollars remaining after all of these other tax credits. And as I said, there's more than $1 billion of tax credits that were approved this year alone. So it's very unlikely that we're going to be seeing our TABORs hit that cap and go over. There was another bill. This was the bill very similar to the one we saw last year about property taxes, because as you guys know, Proposition HH failed. So there was a special session that was created last year in order to deal with property taxes. Very little was dealt with vis-a-vis property taxes. During that special session, there were other tax measures, other things that did happen, but with respect to property taxes, there was a property tax commission that was created, and Senator Baisley was on that commission, so he can give a little bit more in terms of the details of that. But that commission was supposed to have recommendations to the General Assembly, as I understood it, by March 31st, by the end of March, so that the General Assembly could consider those particular provisions in a reasonable amount of time prior to the end of session. Well, we did not actually see, the General Assembly did not actually see that particular bill drop until Monday of this last week. And it passed out on Wednesday of this past week. And it basically seeks to be a property tax, do I need to move this closer? A property tax overhaul. So, you know, it's interesting. There was talk even just last week, so not this week, but last week, the last week of April, first week of May, to have a special session in August or September in order to deal with this because the proposal wasn't ready, the policy wasn't put together. But it's my understanding from sitting on the Appropriations Committee and hearing this bill that the impetus for speeding it up was a set of ballot initiatives that some private groups have put forth to impact property taxes, one of which has been titled, which means it will be indeed on the ballot. This particular ballot initiative would say that that if the government collected more than a 4% increase in property tax in a given year, they had to come back to the people and ask to keep that remaining dollars. So it's kind of TABOR 2.0, TABOR applied. It's a re-brucing of all of the districts that have de-bruced, and the General Assembly realized that if that ballot initiative were to pass, it's actually a constitutional amendment, so it will require 55% of the vote. If that were to pass, it would cost the state $3 billion. Now, just so you know, this year, the legislature passed almost a $43 billion budget. Of that, about $16 billion is general fund, and so those $3 billion would come out of the general fund, and they thought that that was untenable, and so they pushed this policy through. And I actually have pictures because while we were in appropriations, we did the first 4 or 5 bills, I don't remember what it was, on Tuesday, and then we went into a recess, and I have some pictures of the bill sponsors as well as the bill drafters and some of their stakeholders sitting in a circle right behind the witness desk in the committee room, actually writing the policy, finalizing some amendments, and otherwise trying to figure out what should be included in this particular bill. It was a 25-page bill when it came to appropriations. There was an 8-page amendment put on it. Then there was more amendments put on the House floor, both in second and third reading. All of that to say that the idea is for 2 years to have a property tax decrease, right, to cap your property taxes for a couple of years. However, your state or your school taxes will likely increase to about 7.1%, which is the bulk of your property taxes, because the state doesn't want to backfill. So what the state is, in essence, as I understand it, done is try to reduce property taxes for at least the next couple of years. In exchange, though, the local governments will have to absorb that loss. There will be a limited amount of backfill from the state in order to cover some of those groups that will be hardest hit, but by and large, the local governments will be on their own. And the way I understand it to be, basically the state sees its funds as sacrosanct, doesn't want to give up any of its spending authority, and has an expectation that the local governments, if they are hit as much as is expected, then they'll come to the people and ask for an increase in taxes, sales taxes or mill levies or what have you, in order to make up the difference. And so there was a lot of confusion about what was included in this so-called property tax relief, and I think it's yet to be really determined the consequence or the impact that will have. But needless to say, I guess what I'm trying to convey is that the state government continues to spend more and more of your money, with less and less accountability and oversight, less and less consistent with what I would say is the constitutional provisions, and hoping that we won't notice, honestly. I will tell you, we ran a bill, a colleague of mine and me ran a bill to allow for the Homestead Act to be portable. We did it vis-a-vis a constitutional amendment because homestead is actually a constitutional provision. It was part of Tabor, and we wanted to make sure to do it the way that the Constitution laid out. Another bill did end up passing the legislature to allow for portability. It circumvented the normal constitutional process, but it will allow for portability, but it's only guaranteed for 2 years. And I find that to be very concerning, because for our seniors who say, I want to downsize, but I want to be able to keep this benefit, this homestead exemption benefit, they will only have that for 2 years. It takes 10 years, as you guys know, to acquire that through the normal process. So they might get it for the first 2 years, but then if the legislature decides not to re-up that, then they are going to be without that benefit for at least 8 years until they hit the normal set. And so there are just a variety of things that you will likely hear coming out in the press that sound good, but to the degree that I'm trying to convey, hopefully I'm doing that in a sufficient manner, not everything is as gold as it otherwise seems. So if you are, for instance, one of those seniors who wants to move, please do be cautious and know that such a portability may not actually be there in 2 years' time, and you might not be able to actually take on those dollars. So I will leave it at that for now and pass this little guy off, and I'm sure there'll be questions, so I'll come back up after the senator.
Senator Paisley, I'm not going to stand up and introduce you. I think it's fine.
Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Representative Luck. It remains a real honor to serve with Representative Luck. Thanks to everybody for coming here. So if we haven't met, I'm Mark Paisley, and very honored to serve as state senator for Fremont County and 7 other counties thrown in the pile. one of the very big bills that we got through this year was the property tax bill. I really appreciate Senator Luck, Representative Luck's description on that. So I'll just add just one real thing, maybe two on that. So as this task force or this commission that was created out of the special session from last year, there were 17 of us assigned to that. And I always wonder, why do you put me on this bill, on this commission, on this task force and so on? And I always get back, because you will fight. I go, okay, I'll fight. So I was on there, and I may have, forgive me if I'm repeating myself from last time here, but the thing I'd like to add is that the idea of that commission was to look at from scratch. Let's take a blank slate and let's kind of rethink property taxes, because what happened, of course, was that the Gallagher Amendment went away a couple of years ago, in 2020, I believe it was, and so the governing feature of Gallagher would keep the property taxes for residents at a percentage level that we could all kind of count on. It's going to creep up over time as things do, but it would not go shooting up like they did. And so it was just a time bomb waiting to happen. It didn't take long for that bomb to go off. All that had to happen was property valuations had to go up, to raise quickly, and they did. And therefore, the taxation based on that valuation also went shooting up. So during the special session, the very last bill that was passed this past early December at the special session was, let's create this task force to go rethink this. There wasn't a whole lot of rethinking, and this is the point I wanted to get across more than anything else, is that I was extremely disappointed in how the task force ran, how it was run. It was run by, I'm going to use his name a couple of times, Senator Chris Hansen, who led that charge. And I'll end with a quote from him, but he has got to be the most talented, smart, good-looking, all-American-looking guy. The guy who uses big words like soliloquy in his natural course of talk. He's just a really talented, smart person. He also has a much different worldview than I do. He's way on the left, and so they chose him to lead that task force. What we saw right away, instead of let's rethink how taxes are collected or calculated, it was let's revisit why we tax the way we do. And so we had a bunch of speeches come to us, even from across the nation, of other states and how they were doing what they were doing. And one of them that really sticks out was California. So they had someone from California talking about California's property taxation. And if anybody familiar with 1978 Proposition 13 from California? So yeah, so there's several of us here that remember that. And they talked about what a tragedy Proposition 13 had been as a capping. And I'm thinking, what do you mean tragedy? It saved people's homes when the property taxes went shooting way up. And so they talked about how everything that had happened, just patchwork of laws that had been added on since then. And I guess they have made a mess of it. Anyway, the point that I want to get across, though, is there was not any openness in really changing, on a basic level, how we calculate property taxes in Colorado. The disadvantage of my being on that task force is that I don't have a background in property taxes. The advantage to me being on that task force is that I don't have a background in property taxes. So I come as an aerospace engineer, I'm going, so you do it this way because why are you? And at about the third meeting, it occurred to me that there is no good relationship between the value of our property and the budget that each special district needs. For instance, if our property values go up 45%, then the revenue for the water district goes up 45%. Why is that? The water district did not need 45% more, nor did the library district, nor the fire district, and so on. Certainly not based on the value of the increase of your property. And if the opposite happened, if your property values dropped by 20%, that wouldn't mean that the libraries need 20% less money to function on. So there's not a one-to-one correlation that made any sense to me as I started thinking about this. And also, by the way, and you all know this, as I do, when your property tax or when your property valuation goes up 45%, your income did not go up 45% along with that in order to afford that increase in your property tax. So where's the correlation? Well, there is not one. So my proposal to the team, to the task force was, hey, if we're tasked to rethink this, let's rethink this. Let's disconnect the valuation of our property from the budget that's being assigned to all of these special districts that we live in. Let's take a Tabor approach. Let's baseline the budgets for all of these special districts. So your library district, for instance, they know how much they've been living on, and then over time, we could increase their budget even automatically based on inflation and population, and then just have all of those special districts they can count on their budgets to just increase like everything else, kind of on a natural level. And then we could use the valuation of our properties to divide up the responsibility for that, so that the 800 square foot house is not paying the same portion of the property tax for funding the library, for instance, as would be the 5,000 square foot home, as an example. So we could use property valuations as the divisor, but not as the multiplier. Anyway, that they all looked at me, all those people that were on that task force looked at me like, what? And it was just, it was an odd thing. It was so foreign, just the thought to them, going, well, tell me why it makes any sense to do things the way you've always been doing it. And they go, well, it's the way we've always been doing it. It's kind of the explanation. So the senior analyst sitting in the audience for us and who works for the state, he's the property tax king there and at the Capitol, so just a staff member, not a legislator. He sends me a text as I'm being rejected, and he says, and by the way, the rejection was, I propose that not that we make that change, but that we study that change, that coming out of this task force, that we fund the study of how could we rethink this, because I knew there's complexities to it. And how do we balance that with commercial taxation and so on. But they just said, no, we don't even want to consider it. I get a text from him sitting in the audience, Greg, and he says, I understand what you're saying. Let's talk about this. So I've had conversations with him, very good, constructive conversations with him. I'm going to continue talking with him and roping in one of the attorneys that writes the bills for us, and we're at the beginnings of considering a ballot measure for 2025, perhaps, where maybe we can rethink this, rebase this whole property tax idea. So more to come as I think that through. But in the meantime, yes, as Representative Luck said, we have the bill that came through in the last minute, and then in response to all of this, we do have a ballot measure that you'll see, at least one, on the ballot this November that will do things like cap the rate of growth. It can't grow any faster than some percentage. I don't recall what that is, 4, 6%, something like that. So we'll see. But those will be competing ideas. In the meantime, let me just go over the kind of the general postmortem of the session. Since Representative Luck and I have been in the legislature, we've had an average of about 630 bills each year. I pulled them up. The number of bills that were introduced my first year was 598 bills in 2019. Next year, 2020, set a new record of 651 bills. And then the next year, 2021, it was 623 bills. Then a new high water mark was set in 2022 of 657. Last year dropped down to 617 bills that were introduced, and then this year, as Representative Luck said, 705 bills. 705. So it's about a 10% increase over what's been the average over the past 5-6 years, about 10%. Interestingly, that's also about the percentage of bills that we were able to push off the end of the calendar to where they never saw the light of day. They never got all the way through the process, the legislative process, because of all the fine work done by the House of Representatives more than the Senate. We did our share, but boy, did they do theirs of using the one strong tool that the minority party has, and that is what we think of as filibustering, the delay, the debate. So 59 bills were prevented from making it all the way through the process. There were some good bills in there that died as well, dying on the calendar. There were 9 bills that were intentionally laid over beyond the session end date, so that's on top of the 59 bills that simply could not make it through. I'm going to make my last comment about my friend and colleague, Senator Chris Hansen. So I'm sitting next to him on the last day of the session. We were having our final speeches, goodbye speeches to the people who were not returning next year due mostly to term limits. And I'm having a friendly chat with Chris, and I said, man, you pushed through a lot of bills this year, and he really did. His name was on a lot of bills that made it through, and he goes, yeah, I had a good year this year. He says, I lost a few too. And I said, yeah, we saw some losing. He says, I've been thinking about it kind of along the lines of Elon Musk, where he says, failure is okay. He says sort of like if you sell a car and the buyer accepts your first offer for sale, then you think, boy, I didn't push hard enough. I could have gotten more out of that. He says, so I've decided I'm going to start pushing the envelope harder and harder, knowing that I'm going to have some fail, but I'm going to do as much as I possibly can. I go, oof. And there's the difference between the right and the left. So the goal of the right, generally, is to efficiently operate the responsibilities of government, the efficient utility of government. Roads and bridges, prisons, those sort of things. The goal of the left is to manage the people. And that's what my friend Chris is doing, is managing the people. So I always describe the Colorado State statute as the roadmap for micromanaging our behavior. So the notable bills, we talked about the property tax. The K-12 finance formula was updated for the first time in, decades. So it's better than it was. It's still not great because, of course, all the fingers that got put into that pie, but that's a significant difference on how we will redistribute the wealth to pay for the education of those in the K-12 age group. There were 20, this was the emphasis this year, 20 housing bills that addressed housing density goals along transit routes. So you don't see that so much here in, in Fremont, but in the Front Range, along in the Denver area, where the train comes by, where the light rail goes by, then they're pressing for more dense housing there. It's that utopian thinking. I remember thinking about how to make a really cool city when I was like 10, and so a lot of them don't get out of that thinking how cool it would be to have high rises and transit, public transit that gets you there. There's a funny named limited parking bill that I scratched my head when I first saw the title of the bill, but it was to disallow minimum parking limits. I had that same look on my face. The dog head turn, huh? Look, so a lot of municipalities have requirements where if you're going to put in apartments, for instance, you've got to have a minimum number of parking spots for the residents of those apartment units. So perhaps one parking space per apartment or one parking space per bedroom, things like that. So this is a very typical thing to do to ensure that we have sufficient parking for the people who live, and when you're adding housing, you're going to add the demand for parking, so you've got to put in that parking. Well, this bill lifts that requirement because they want you to stop driving. They want you to use the light rail, the bus, and so on. So they're managing our behavior by lifting that requirement. They want to add density through something called accessory dwelling units. So here's a statewide law going into effect that says that a municipality cannot, HOA and so on, cannot prevent someone from adding a mother-in-law house, as we call them, or a granny home, or one of your kids to live above the garage or something like that. So they're forcing that on, kind of overriding local laws. Let's see. There's some more laws about that protect tenants who are struggling to pay their rents and so on, that make it tougher, of course, on the landlord side with the tenants who are struggling. And here's a really interesting one that lifted any limits on the number of residents that can live at a single address. Another head scratcher. Why is that? Well, I see one reason that's pretty easy to guess for more dense housing, especially if we've got a bunch of immigrants that have poured in and 20 of them want to live in one place. That's okay now, even if the local zoning laws don't allow such things. They will be now. The other thing that I suspect is in this, and that has to do with election integrity. So we have suspect mail-in ballots where a bunch of ballots will come from a single address. And that, of course, is a red flag. Well, I think they might be trying to address that as well. Say, well, there's no limit how many people can live in a place. Let's see, I'll move on to another topics. The guns. So gun control, there were a dozen gun control bills that were introduced. There's much more stringent requirements on carrying concealed. That includes for the legislators to carry concealed weapons into the Capitol. For 150 years, we've been allowed to do that. This bill says we're not allowed to do that. We bypass the metal detector on the way in. This bill, by the way, is in conflict with a standing law that says that a legislator cannot be arrested, cannot be held up, and so on when serving in the Capitol or even in transit to and from. If you're driving in, one reason to put your legislative plate on is because a police officer cannot pull you over if you're on your way in to go to the Capitol. And I think that has to do with somebody, I don't know if it's Colorado or somewhere else, where they attempted to prevent the vote by one side of the aisle by having a bunch of cops pull a bunch of legislators over and holding them up while the vote happened. That's just rumor. I don't know if that's true or not. But at any rate, there's a conflict there. If we're not allowed to carry concealed and they can't stop us to check, then I know a bunch of cowboys will take the more interesting choice on that one. There's safe spaces, as they call one of them, or sensitive spaces. I'm not seeing that on here, but I know, so this is the designation of certain types of spots like churches and the Capitol and so on, where you're not allowed to carry your concealed firearms. This is just a terrible idea when we know that when someone comes into a church expecting there to be not much resistance to shoot up the place, and they are met with resistance. I mean, very real examples of that happening in Colorado Springs, for instance, where a lot of lives were saved because the local folks attending that church and who had the responsibility of security step up and the good guy with the gun stopping the bad guy with the gun. Here's one that's disturbing. Colorado Bureau of Investigation tasked with the authority now to investigate illegal firearms matters. The reason that's an issue is our sheriffs are kind of a last line of defense for us. When the legislature passes an evidently unconstitutional law regarding firearms or anything else, then the sheriffs, we can depend on them in most cases across the state to not enforce an unconstitutional law. So we put in, the state legislature puts in an unconstitutional firearms law, and the sheriff will go, well, I swore to uphold the Constitution, so I won't be enforcing that law. But here it gives the authority to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to reach into every county. So that's the sneaky move there. Very disturbing. Let's see. There's a new excise tax being placed on firearms. But we killed a few as well. So the main one, the assault weapons ban, so that would have banned most long guns in the state. And so that's been a dream of the left for quite a long time, to ban long guns. And that's an example of when the majority party scared themselves. You know, there's not a whole lot that we can do to stop what the majority party decides to do, since they have such a strong majority in both chambers and they have the governor's office. So if they want to push something through, it's going to come through, unless they've scared themselves. So what we have watched happen on numerous occasions, and it certainly falls within those 9 bills that were intentionally pushed off beyond the calendar, is there's conversation that happens between the governor's office and the legislature where he makes it known to them, and I'm conjecturing, but I'm 99% sure I'm right, to say, don't let this particular bill get to my desk. And I think that the assault weapons ban bill is a strong example of exactly that. So I sit on the committee that heard that bill, and so the sponsor, in the last couple of days of the session, came in and introduced that bill, like this day before the last day of the session, introduced the bill, and then postponed it indefinitely. Said, I'm asking you guys to vote to postpone the hearing of this bill to never. You know, so we can postpone it to like the day after the session or indefinitely. And so we postponed it indefinitely at the sponsor's request. But she didn't go quietly. She gave a big speech about how important this bill is, and then asked us to postpone it indefinitely, which just, of course, conveys to you that, well, her party said, this is a bridge too far. It's going to make us too unpopular with the folk. We don't want to pass this, and we don't even want you to put it before the committees of the whole, so that it would be debated and voted on and records kept. So some of those bills died. I'd like to say we can take credit for it on our side of the aisle and the minority party, but I don't think that would be accurate. I think they just have such a strong majority that sometimes they go further than their sensitivities would allow. So,
Senator, I am going to request that we kind of wrap up and leave a little bit of time for questions.
Thank you. I'm actually, good timing. I'm on my final comment.
Terrific.
It's right there. So I mentioned earlier, just philosophically, I I see the goal of the right to employ a efficient utility of government, the things that you expect out of government, that we should do them well and do them inexpensively, and the goal of the left being to manage our behavior. What I've yet to figure out is how do we limit power to the consent of the governed. This is that wonderful statement in the Declaration of Independence, our founding document, that says that governments are instituted among men to secure our rights, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. So if you think about amongst the things I was describing and that Representative Luck was describing that were passed as laws to manage our behavior, did you consent for the government to have that power over your behavior? And if not, how do we prevent that from even going into place on some kind of an automatic fashion? I don't have that figured out yet. I'm thinking about that real hard. And I mean, we have the Constitution, of course, that says, here's the line we draw, and we all take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of the state of Colorado. That gets violated quite often. But even so, even if it's constitutional, but it is a lifting of money from your hard-earned wallet to institute a program that you have no interest in, why do they have the power to do that without your consent? So that's my final thought, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause here and invite Representative Luck back up to answer some questions. And I'm going to use moderator's privilege here to address, in fact, what you were talking about from the business standpoint. Again, we're members of the Colorado Chambers of Commerce. They had a list of about 8 or 10 job killer bills which were introduced. Now, you would think the majority had 2/3 in the House and 1 vote short of 2/3 in the Senate. Why should they listen? But through a lot of hard work, through organizations, I think we're able to kill 8 out of 10 of those bills. I think the same thing could be said elsewhere. So I think in addressing your question, and I'm going to have, since you're in the middle of it, the ability of groups to influence legislation and either get it killed or get it passed, how far does that extend? We know the trial lawyers own a good part of it. We saw that with construction defects, but a lot of other bills were able to either significantly amend or kill. And some other good ones we were able to get passed as a result of the effort from outside folks. So how important is the role of citizens and associations in talking to legislators? And how do we say in Fremont County, we know we've got your ear here, how do we influence other votes?
Sure. I appreciate that question for a lot of reasons. This has been one of the tasks I've taken on over the last couple of years to facilitate folks coming up to the Capitol. So bringing groups up to the Capitol, regardless of your particular perspective on a bill, just to be able to speak into that process. Because there are so many times when a committee hearing will have 2 or 3 people, that's all, on a bill. And most of the time, those are the 2 or 3 people that the bill sponsor, him or herself, scheduled to be there to support that particular bill. And then what happens is, as either the bill goes through the process, or more often than not, in my experience, as that bill gets implemented, and then people start to understand the impact of that bill on their particular life and their business and their sphere of influence, then they raise their hand and say, oh, wait, this impacts me. We need to run a bill to fix the things that were wrong in the first bill. And so it's very important to me to have as many voices as possible, because I don't call it filibustering. I call it principled debate, right? We are dealing with the lives of people. This is not it's not a joke, right? It's not happy hour. It's not playtime, even though you will see some of my colleagues drunk on the floor because they see it differently than I do. This is a time in which we are actually writing laws that govern people's lives, that will either lead to suffering or will lead to thriving. We need to take that very seriously, and the best way that we can make informed decisions is by having information. And I know that some folks have this view that as a legislator, you have to know everything from accounting law all the way to zoology and know all of the ins and outs of that law. But there are 44 titles that take up many shelves on a bookcase, right? I have this little bookcase that takes up the entire bookshelf because of how many are in there. You have to be an expert in a particular area. You cannot be an expert in all. And in fact, many of us aren't even an expert in a particular area because the laws are changing so fast at the federal level, the regulations that are being inputted, much less the average citizen knowing all of these different things. And so if we are going to make good policy choices, if we're going to make sure that we are avoiding as many unintentional negative consequences as possible, we need as many people at the table as possible. I will say, to your point about the outside groups, my experience the last 2 years has been that the Senate has been the stopgap. The House has passed through a lot of egregious things, and the lobby corps has been irate about what has gone through the House process because of the composition, because of the mindset of those in. But even members of the majority in the Senate are much more moderate than many of the members of the majority in the House, and so those voices in the Senate will be the ones who are persuaded in many instances by the lobby corps, by these associations, by these groups, and explained to how certain policies are going to negatively impact certain constituencies. And the Senate, those particular members of the Senate, have been able to wield a greater degree of power than most other single members in terms of changing those laws. So, it's interesting. We do what's called Senate concurrences to House bills, or Senate amendments, House concurrence to Senate amendments, my apologies. So when we send a bill to the Senate, that's a House bill, we say, this is our product, this is what we want you to pass. And the Senate says, yes, okay, we'll pass it through unamended, or no, hold on, we actually have our own thoughts on this. I can't tell you the number of times that those Senate amendments were what we call a complete strike below. They just rewrote the bill. It was no longer what the House sent over. They rewrote it because of those voices in my estimation, and the senator can speak better into this. But I will tell you that a number of those folks who were those moderating forces in the legislature who were amenable to the outside voices are either term limited or up for election. And there are a number of outside groups who want to make sure that those types of moderating voices are no longer present in the Senate and that it looks very similar to the House. And so if that happens this election, I'm not sure what next year will be, but regardless, we have to have more and more voices at the legislature explaining details about these different policies, because I've told you guys before, but the way that the bills often work is some constituent has a problem and comes to their legislator and says, will you solve this problem, and here's how I think you should solve it. Or there's a lobbying group, some entity that's been in this space for 40 years, that has been researching this, that has a particular agenda that they're pushing for decade after decade, and they come to a legislator and they hand a packet and they say, here's your bill language, here are your talking points, here's your press points, here's your witness list, here's the whole kit and caboodle, you go and push this through for us. And as other legislators who either aren't operating in that space or who have other priorities that they're working on, they have to rely on those outside trusted voices. Otherwise, that one voice will dominate the conversation because that one voice has the expertise and others lack it. And so to your point, please, I would say involve yourself as much as is possible. Senator?
I'm looking up a quote that is so supportive.
While he's looking that up, I'll just make a side comment. Senator Beasley pointed out last time, you got just about twice as many representatives as senators, and you each get 5 bills. So representatives, fortunately, their bills take longer to get through, so by the time they get to the Senate, sometimes we're safe because they don't even have time to consider House bills.
So, yes, in many ways that is a possibility. I will say, though, that the bills that they want to get pushed through, they make sure that they get pushed through, and those are often the big bills, the ones that are seeking to transform the way that we do life in Colorado.
Yes, thank you. So, to your point, Robert, there's an organization called Colorado Concern, just another nonprofit, influential, government-involved nonprofit, and the bill for property taxes that's being referred as a measure to the oh, excuse me, no, it's not. This is the new property tax bill, Senate Bill 233. They were engaged with Colorado Concern, trying to influence how that was written, and so Colorado Concern pressed for some adjustments in the percentage numbers and so on in there, and so they capitulated. The folks, in particular, Representative Chris DeGrew Kennedy, but it says here in a quote by Marianne Goodland, who was a reporter who was ever present at the Capitol, she says, in return, lawmakers wanted a pledge by Colorado Concern to support Senate Bill 233 and back off of supporting two ballot measures, including one that's already on the November ballot that would cut property taxes more steeply, but without backfilling lost revenue for schools and local governments. Point being, they're negotiating with these organizations that lean on them because they've got some tremendous membership, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, the chambers of commerce, like you guys. That's a big influence on them because they represent so many people, and they usually have some pretty good funding behind any kind of marketing and so on that might come against them. So that is all true. I'll also mention, though, that when it comes to influencing folks, the further left you get in your political philosophy, the more of a collectivist you become, and you have less independence of thought. But there certainly are those on the left who are independent-minded, people that we all respect, and you want to appeal to those. If you attempt to appeal to the people that always just vote party, then what's the use? But after a while, you learn the folks who are just good, smart, independent-minded folk, and you sit with them and make the appeal. And the lobby corps, as Representative Luck described, they do have considerable power because they will represent industries. They'll represent whole organizations, groups of people, collections of groups of people who have paid them to convey thought, and they will, of course, go grab that independent-minded person in the majority, legislator in the majority party, and just say, listen, this is what's wrong with this bill. This is the terrible effect it's going to have. We're going to raise all kinds of ruckus about that you press for this bill unless you make these adjustments. So here is some amendments that we'd like to see go through there. And that's the kind of influence that does happen. So it's, think negatively typically is about lobbyists, but there's a lot of very constructive things that the good lobbyists can do for us and with us. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Again, the role of the chamber is to speak as the voice of business primarily, but we also have other interests. I know Representative Luck, you get the joy of running for election every 2 years. Senator Baisley, I don't think you're not up this year, are you?
I get to skate this time.
You get to go. And I'd ask the audience, this is a question to the audience as much as to you. We do these things while you're in session, and that train is already moving, and you sort of can wave at us as it goes by. Is there any value? Does this group see an interest, and do you see an interest in us having some sessions prior to the, and again, an election year, I think we can, I think we'd need to have, say, both candidates for the House seat to come and talk. What are some of the things that we're concerned about? Would that be a benefit? Would you folks be interested in doing something like that? Justin?
I think if it was clear that it was for stumping and not for legislative work, like this is a legislative work session that we talk about legislative, but there's sometimes some stumping mixed in. It'd be nice if it was more clear about if we do this, that it was, clearly for candidate activity.
Focused on, what sort of things we'd like to see and what sort of things you see coming so that we can be prepared to be active citizens is kind of my thinking. We'll think more about it, but is there a general interest? You can nod your head, raise your hand, yeah, okay. Sound good to you?
So I will actually speak into that. I've put forth a bill multiple times actually, with respect to government transparency. The most recent one was a bill that would have allowed for legislators to publicly post on the General Assembly's website 3 months prior, multiple times, multiple iterations, either their bill draft titles or their bill draft language, so that it would facilitate communication, so that people would know before we got into session what was going on, what was being contemplated, raise their hand and say, I want to have coffee with you before the chaos of the legislative session. That bill did get out of the House, but it died in the Senate. And part of my understanding as to why it likely died in the Senate was because there was a desire actually not to have that transparency, because there is a lot of value to those who are in power in either party, frankly, to keep that information closed off so that contrary groups don't have time to mobilize. But in that vein, right, that is my heart, to be as open as possible. I think that's a great idea. I would like to, if possible, just explain a couple of things that folks, even though it's not business related, now have a responsibility towards because of the laws that shifted.
Please.
Thank you. So one thing for any of you who use your phone at all in the car, that will now be a primary offense to be able to be pulled over on. So if you are holding your phone up to your ear and talking, if you're holding it like this, if the police see you in any way, shape, or form with your phone out and about while you are driving, you will be pulled over for that. Based on the faces here, nobody does that, so no need to worry, I guess, in this room, but let your friends and family know that that is something that is going to change in the law. Right now, it's a secondary offense, meaning you have to be pulled over for something else first before they can also cite you for that, so just have that on your radar. For those of you who are carrying, who do believe in the right to protect yourself, the innocent around you or your property. To Senator Baisley's point, there are increased regulations around that topic. If you conceal carry, there will be annual training that you have to submit to in order to continue to conceal. You have to keep that, if you keep it in your car, it now has to be in a locked compartment of some kind. So either a lock box, so your lock glove box, your lock console, wherever. If you are used to carrying into a government building, that is now no longer permissible unless the government entity deliberately changes the policy for that government. So here in Fremont County, the county commissioners could pass an ordinance that allows for the carrying consistent with what has traditionally been allowed in this building, but they have to take the active step in that direction. If they don't, then all government buildings, courthouses, special districts, all of the government entities, as well as polling places, you'll no longer be permitted to carry. There were 3 other ones that I wanted to mention, and right now they've escaped my mind. Maybe, Senator, if you had anything else to add, then I'll remember.
Yeah, I'll give you a stall moment. There's a bill that that will welcome now all the immigrants who come into Colorado in a really wonderful way. It'll get them set up with legal counseling and help them find jobs and get housing and get their kids plugged into, registered into school, and it's a whole welcome mat thing, and so you can be proud about that too. Let me see. Did I not stall long enough?
There's just so many going through my head.
There were 3.
Oh, taxes. There's one. Sorry. So if you rent a car here in Colorado, you will be charged additional taxes for that. Those dollars will be going towards building public transit, the rail system. You'll also find an increased amount of taxes if you go to take your, to buy tires. So I think it's going up to $4 a tire. But there are a number of...
Fees, Representative Luck, fees, they say?
I call that semantics, Bob, but yes, that's what they call them.
It's legal semantics, however, is the problem.
They are legal semantics. So as you guys remember, fees were incorporated under the Tabor requirements, right? That you had to ask permission before you increased fees, but that was to a certain amount. When you create a new enterprise, when you create a new business that's governmentally run, if that business is likely to incur a certain amount of money over a certain period of time, then the people have to be asked for permission to create that enterprise. What we see as a workaround of that provision is the creation of multiple enterprises in order to divvy up those dollars so as never to hit that cap, so as never to have to ask the people. We see that also with respect to other things. So for instance, this year a bill passed to say that if the state is working as a conduit for tax dollars, so for instance, gambling funds, the state collects them and then redistributes a portion of those to local governments like in Teller County or Gilpin, the places where casinos are, that any of those dollars that go directly back to the local governments, that they don't have to be subject to Tabor, because they were otherwise doubly subject to Tabor at the state and at the local level. What was interesting about this, though, is that it didn't lay out just a paragraph in statute that provided for those two, the cigarette and gambling tax exceptions. It's laid out in an actual statutory scheme, and anytime that happens, you can be sure that in future years they're going to continue to add to that scheme. And a member of the Joint Budget Committee informed me that one of the places they're looking to go next is the Department of Transportation, because the Department of Transportation redirect some of its funds to local governments for purposes of fixing roads, and we're talking $1 billion or more dollars in doing that sort of thing. And so that would reduce the state's Tabor liability by hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's all these different fees and taxes and structures designed in order to feed more money into the state. And one of my frustrations with this is not only Senator Baisley's point about the role of government, in my view, is limited, right? It's to secure the rights. It's to be the referee and to allow the people to play on the field and to be innovative and creative and do all of the things that they need to do without the hindrance and confines of someone saying you have to do it this way. Because we know when you say you have to do it this way, you kill any innovation of other ways that it could be done. There are roles for criminal law and contract law and tort law. There are needs for law, for the structure, but the more you confine, the more you squelch. It's like that little girl who holds a flower or butterfly in her hand, and she's so excited to bring it home and show mom, but when she gets home, because she squeezed it so tightly, it's now dead or crumpled. It's that kind of idea, right? And so for those of us who believe in a limited government approach, a more hands-open approach, the use of these dollars to continue to squelch is painful, but then there's also the issue of where is the value on the return of that investment. So for instance, the budget stabilization factor has been paid off, which means schools are now fully funded based off of the commitments that have been made over the years to schools. But to what end? Because I don't know if you guys know this, but every student in Colorado, the pure pupil amount dedicated to each student on average is, what do you think, $5,000? Anybody? 10? 15? It's $18,000. Every student is given $18,000 from all of the revenue sources on average in schools. There are some schools, even in House District 60, the one that I represent, that they have $28,000 per pupil. But let's just say $20,000 a 20-student class. That's $400,000 for each classroom. And what are we seeing in terms of outputs? What are we seeing in terms of the success of our kids when we look at that, right? On average, a teacher will get paid $100,000 in salary and benefits combined. So that leaves an additional $300,000. Where does those dollars go? There's a school district in Colorado that has 6 administrators for every 1 teacher. The average testing scores are less than 50% in Colorado. There's a school district that has a 6% passage rate on their standardized tests, 6%. And we continue to push money after money after money into it. So to Senator Baisley's point about property taxes, perhaps it's time to reconsider, right, reevaluate the whole system and say, what is successful and what are we actually trying to do? Because if we're just trying to push dollars, we're really good at pushing dollars. But our kids are struggling. Our kids are suffering. When I taught 6th grade, those kids, the vast majority of them came in at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. They hadn't written because they were all on iPads. We had to teach print and teach cursive. They had no real ability to read or do basic math. And I will say that by the end of that year, they were all testing at the 6th grade level because the curriculum that was used in that particular environment. But we have to have some serious conversations because we keep spending more and more money up there. I mean, billions upon billions of dollars. When I came in, I think in 2021, I think we'd passed, I think the legislature, I'm not including myself in that, the legislature passed, I think, a $26 billion budget, 26, 28, somewhere around there. And this year, almost $43 billion in 4 years. Is your life basically doubly improved? You know, or it's a little less than doubly, right? 24 to 46, 43. Is it the state's responsibility to help your life improve? I mean, if you're paying for all of this, right, it's your dollars, and could you utilize those funds in a better way?
I mean, would you make that argument?
Do what?
Would you make the argument that it's the state's responsibility to improve everyone's quality of life?
Well, if they're putting themselves out as needing all these dollars in order to improve the quality of life, there should be an actual demonstration that they've done that. And they continue to bring in more and more dollars, and people continue to suffer in greater and greater measure. At least that's my experience in talking to folks. They struggle more to pay their bills, they struggle more to feed their families, they struggle more in all of the different ways of life. The roads are worse. I mean, it's just, there's a greater degree of suffering, and to me, that's grievous.
Do I hear the start of a State House campaign here? I think I do.
Well,
Congratulations.
you just got me on
No,
the
I
soapbox.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. I want to thank you. Did you have anything else, Senator? Are you good?
Three items real fast I think that folks ought to know about. And by the way, I'd love to answer your question, in that the duty of the government is to ensure the pursuit of the happiness, not the happiness. So, but, okay, there are 3 ballot measures that are being put on the ballots. 2 ways to get something on the November ballot. One is by petition, 125,000 folks, so valid signatures to get something on the ballot, or the legislature can place something on. Yes, sir?
Would you please enunciate the microphone a little clearer?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, so there's two ways to get an item on the ballot for the voters' consideration. You can they can get on there by petition, which is quite an effort, 125,000 approximately. It's a percentage of the previous vote to get on the ballot. And then, so that's happening, but the legislature can also refer measures to the ballot. It does not go by the governor. The governor does not get to assign yes or no on that, just the legislature puts them on, and we have 3. So you'll see 3 measures on the ballot that the state legislature this year put on there. One, you'll go, whatever. It changes, it makes a 1-week change in certain election deadlines. Just a technical thing, no big deal. Another one that is substantive, it ensures that those charged with first-degree murder are not eligible for bail. Okay. And then the last one is, and these are all constitutional amendments, by the way, so it'll require 55% of the population vote. 55% of the voting to be 55% in favor of. And the last one, there's a single statement in the state constitution regarding marriage. It says marriage will be between one man and one woman. And that, you're being asked to remove that statement out of the state constitution. So.
There's one other, just not a statutory initiative that the legislature put on, and that is to ask to increase taxes so that in addition to the taxes paid on firearms federally, you would also pay for state taxes So I think it's like 22% or 11, I don't remember what the final number ended up. But basically asking you for permission to tax all firearm-related items, ammunition, et cetera.
Well, I want to thank you for coming, and you're talking about ballots. I think those three are going to be probably 10% of from what I've seen. There are going to be a lot of ballot measures this year, I think, coming from initiated process. So now's the time to start watching for those and reading them. When your ballot comes, plan to have, my wife and I usually sit down with a single malt and vote. I think this year we're going to sit down with a bottle of single malt and vote. But we do the voting before we drink it all, you know. Anyway, thank you for coming, and if you got a few minutes one-on-one, that's up to you. Appreciate. We'd like to thank the Fremont County technical staff back there in the booth, also known as Commissioner Grantham, for running our microphone system and recording this. And thank you all for coming, and we'll get some word we'll have some discussion about how to meet with our legislators in advance of the next session and see if we can be a little more prepared and be prepared to support them on the issues. Obviously, the legislature will be significantly different next year. There are lots of folks termed out. So it won't be anywhere near the same. So again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, everyone.